North to south, coast to coast, around the world. This is John David Coffey. Excuse me. This is the Wells Report. What do we do here? We report the news honestly and fairly. We analyze the news for fact and bias. We point out both. I make commentary, not the news, not propaganda, not biased. It's just my opinion. And, oh, by the way, it's just as valuable as your opinion. And should you happen to have one that is different or you would like to add to the conversation, then by all means take part in the debate. News, analysis, commentary, and debate. This is the Wells Report. Want to say hi to Yvonne Field, availing herself of the chat room available on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Twitch. It's going on right now, and I sincerely appreciate the fact that people are already checking in on the Wells Report as we come to you live today from 2 until 5 p.m. Central. I guess it's daylight time, Central Daylight Time. Lots of news today, and it has to do mainly around the Federal Reserve. The Fed agreed to raise its key short-term interest rate by a 0.5 percentage point today, dialed back from recent other hikes that are referred to as outsized by USA Today, as it draws up an endgame in its aggressive campaign to tame soaring inflation. But the central bank forecast another 0.75 percentage point raise increase. That might happen next year. That's more than previously estimated. Federal officials are thus signaling they believe inflation is still too high. They're not backing off their hard-nosed battle to subdue it, despite growing recession risks. Remember, the only way to stop inflation is to create a recession. And that is exactly what the Fed is doing. And it's just something that you've got to do. The trick to taming inflation, as we've said time and time again here on the Wells Report, is to not allow it out of the genie's bottle in the first place. And that is not something the Democrat leadership in Washington, D.C. saw fit to consider when they started making some very important and very basically detrimental moves to the United States economy. But that's just, it's not my opinion. That's actual truth. But it does sound like I'm grousing, and I'm not intending to grouse. I'm just pointing out the realities. So the central bank forecast another 3-point rate increase next year. The statement after the two-day meeting, the Fed reiterated the ongoing rate increases will be appropriate to bring down yearly inflation to a Fed's 2% stated goal. Right now, we found out yesterday that the month-to-month inflation rate was 7.1%. That is down slightly, and they are pointing to that, to their policy of raising interest rates as a reason why the interest rates are coming down. Some economists reckon the Fed would instead say additional increases would be needed, signaling the Fed is close to winding down the hiking cycle, but that doesn't seem to be the way it is. Now, once again, as we were talking about this, the stock markets were reacting. According to CNBC, the Dow Jones Industrial Average is now off 108 points. It was down as many as 250 earlier today. The S&P is down 14 points. The NASDAQ is 41.89 points. And that's the market shaking this off. That is not that big a deal. It is, I think, appropriate because, once again, these rate increases, when they start going through the economy, they tend to propagate. In other words, it's like a wave, a little bitty wave that starts with a small earthquake, say, for example, on one side of the Pacific Ocean, can become a tsunami by the time it gets to Hawaii. And that is the propagation that we see through any kind of human-based interaction, that is not regulated per se. In other words, things have a tendency to grow. They have a tendency to propagate. And we've talked about this with the cracking of a whip. And what you have to do is you have to slow these things down as the economy begins to react. It takes about 18 months for the economy to react to anything in the United States. And we're getting to the point where the money that hit because of COVID relief has already had its effect. And now the basic responses from about 18 months ago are beginning to take hold. Now we'll see just how far they want to go in slowing down the economy to tame inflation. And we'll see how that works. Yeah, the Dow Jones is rallying somewhat. They're now 93.13 off. They're off 93.13 points, which is not bad. In other words, the markets looked at that and said, "Whoops," and then said, "Well, maybe not so bad. We'll see how that goes." So the way this works out is how much did the federal rate increase? The move follows four straight three-quarter point increases and takes the federal funds rate, which is what the banks charge each other for overnight loans, to a range of somewhere around 4.25 to 4.5%. That's a restrictive level intended to slow economic growth. The hike is expected to ripple through the economy, just like I was talking about a moment ago, driving up rates for credit cards, home equity lines of credit, adjustable rate mortgages, and other loans. Americans, especially seniors, are finally benefiting from higher bank savings. This after years of paltry returns or non-existent returns. Since the benchmark rate hovered near zero in March, the Fed has hoisted it by more than 4 points, the fastest pace since the early 1980s. The Fed now expects the rate to end 2023 at a range of 5 to 5.25%. That's higher than the 4.5 to 4.75% it projected in September. This, according to policymakers' median forecast. It estimates it will cut the rate to 4.1 by the end of 2024 to support an economy likely to be weakened by rate increases. That's above the 3.9% it predicted in September. So most of that is mumbo jumbo because we don't see, but once again, you have to go out 18 months. You have to project outward 18 months to see what's going on. That's why they're talking about the end of 2023 and 2024 when it's the end of 2022. So these are the things you have to deal with. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about some other things that have been happening with regards to the border and the politics therein. This is kind of interesting. I don't know that you remember it or not, but Brian Newsom, he is the communist governor of California. He showed up at the White House when the boss was gone a while back. You remember that? Nobody really has any idea what he was doing. He was visiting Mrs. Biden. I didn't say a word. I'm just saying it was very interesting that Gavin Newsom would show up at the White House when the president was not there. Immediately, a lot of the guys on Fox News, specifically Jesse Waters, said, well, maybe it was Gavin Newsom measuring the drapes, and so on and so on. Well, this is interesting. Now, remember, he is a Democrat socialist. So I just cut to the chase and call him a communist. He's the communist governor of California. And guess what he did yesterday or day before? He warned that President Biden's plan to reverse former President Donald Trump's border policies could break his state. Really? Yeah, the Biden administration is planning to lift the Trump-era Title 42 policy, which is flawed, but it worked. It's still flawed. It allows police and border officers to expedite the expulsion of illegal immigrants on a pretext of COVID-19 infection. Okay? Newsom, speaking to ABC News on Monday, said the fact is what we've got right now is not working, and it's about to break in a post-42 world unless we take some responsibility and ownership. This is Gavin Newsom. I have some thoughts on what he's trying to get done. I'll share them with you in a few moments. But that's Gavin Newsom speaking. And if you're saying, what? You have company. I'm saying that as a father, said the governor. I'm saying that as someone that feels responsibility for being part of the solution, and I'm trying to do my best here. Newsom claimed the U.S. government is sending more and more migrants to California because the state is taking care of folks. The more we do, the burden is placed disproportionately on us. Actually, that's not what he said. I fixed his English. He said, the more we do, the burden is placed disproportionate on us. This is the governor of California. He doesn't even know what tense to use. Anyway, let's move on. We're already at capacity at 9 of our sites. We can't continue to fund all of these sites because of budgetary pressures now being placed on the state and the off-siting issues that I have to address. The reality is, unless we're doing what we're doing, people will end up on the streets. Newsom's comments came as a surprise after years of championing policies to accommodate and expand protections to illegal migrants entering California. About 22% of California's nearly 11 million migrants are in the U.S. illegally, according to the Public Policy Institute of California. In September, Newsom signed a bill allowing illegal immigrants to obtain state IDs saying we're a state of refuge, a majority minority state where 27% of us are migrants. In January, and Newsom unveiled his 2022-2023 California budget plan, which include universal health care benefits for all low-income residents, including illegal migrants. The Biden administration is requesting billions in additional funding for the border as it predicts an enormous spike in migrant encounters when Title 42 authority to quickly expel migrants due to the COVID-19 pandemic ends later this month. A court ordered the administration to stop using the authority, which had been used since March of 2020, to quickly return migrants to Mexico after finding it to be unlawful. That, by the way, is actually true. And so, I mean, I the use of Title 42 is, is an expedited idea that really doesn't necessarily work. And I find it a little bit weird that they tried it because it's COVID-19. Well, the courts would look at that law and say that's not what this law is intended for. And that's exactly what they did, and they said you got to stop using it. Now, there may be some politics involved in that because there certainly were politics in using it in the first place because, as I said, the law was flawed. But the problem with it is there's nothing to replace it. And it's not necessarily out of the realm of possibility that that President Biden might indeed at some point decide that what he needs to do is reinstate Title 42. But how's he going to do that when a court has already ruled that it's unlawful? Well, he'll have to go through the appeals process. Also asking for billions, if not trillions, of more dollars to handle this border mess. A lot of that money is going to go to California because Gavin Newsom is a possible opponent for President Biden in the 2024 presidential chase for the Democrat Party. And so it looks as though there may be politics afoot here. And remember, California started all this mess, this Biden era flood across the border by doing exactly what the article said, which was, hey, we are a state of refuge. Gavin Newsom invited all these people to his state. He made it possible for them to live here. He's now talking about a social safety net for people that are here illegally, something that no one has done in the United States. No politician, regardless of how progressive they happen to be, felt that was a good idea, except now here we are, right in the middle of it. And now we're the American people, American taxpayers, through the auspices of the federal government, will now be paying California's illegal migrant bills. Yeah, there are some problems here. There are definitely some problems here. And I got to tell you, we were talking about a bullwhip going through the American economy. Let's talk about just how quickly things are accelerating from a standpoint of Gavin Newsom cracking the whip on a completely different set of political objectives than he has been championing for years. By saying, my goodness gracious, if we keep having all of these people coming to the state of California, it's going to break the state. Yeah, as if your socialist communism hasn't broken the state already. And this in light of getting hundreds of billions of dollars from the federal government to pay your bills, just as I said it was going to happen. California spent the money on other things, and now they still need more money because that's the way socialism works. It works fine until you run out of everyone else's money. This is the Wells Report. We'll be back with more coming up in just a moment. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Our telephone number is 817-379-2172. 817-379-2172. A lot of people are talking about all kinds of things that we've just opened up our broadcast with, specifically the raise in interest rates to try to tame inflation. Poker says, thanks, Joe, for cutting off our oil pipelines from day one. Thanks for the open borders, costing us untold amounts of money to pay for millions of illegals. Thanks for the insanity of green policies. Thanks, Pelosi and Democrats, for leaving us $31.8 trillion in debt and now about to pass another spending monstrosity. Yeah. Let's see, all the left sees when it looks at millions of illegals is lots of new Democrat voters. It's not actually working out that way, which is why I think there's not that much pushback from Republicans, because a lot of these people are coming to the United States, and when they have a chance to vote, they are voting for Republicans. You know, when you start talking about a monstrosity, the political monstrosity of this border, it's just blatantly illegal. And I'm currently trying to figure out exactly what I need to do and how I need to start some kind of a petition to the Supreme Court of the United States to enforce the Constitution regarding the border of the United States. I'm trying to figure out what I need to do next, because obviously the states could do it. The governors could do it. They could go direct to the Supreme Court of the United States, but so far they haven't. There must be a reason why. I need to find out what that is. Let's see. Newsom thinks he can run for president. He's going against President Biden to contrast himself with the president. Forget that millions of people are fleeing California thanks to him. That's absolutely true. How bad is it with people trying to get out of California? They ran out of U-Haul trucks. That's how bad. It's amazing. California does everything wrong, whether allowing illegals, passing out needles, letting criminals out with no bail, and now talking reparations. The inmates are indeed running the asylum. What's very interesting about all of this is that California, has all of these policies allowing for homelessness, and suddenly that's now an issue with regards to Gavin Newsom. He's saying that we have to stop this onslaught of people coming to California because all their shelters are filled, and it's going to break the state. And if the state can't pay for them, these people will be living on the street. People are already living on the street in California. You can't go anywhere in California without running across somebody who's as high as a kite lying on the ground next to a used needle. I mean, it's ridiculous. The only solution is to build a complete wall, deport all illegals, and keep them out. No other country allows this insanity. It's absolutely true. What has to happen is we have to close the border. Close the border. Mark points out, but California has a budget surplus, so they say. Interesting budget when you can be insolvent 1 year and then have a surplus at the same time. Exactly. They're running out of everybody else's money, as I said. Wonder what it would be like if instead of paying for materials and work not done, they paid for a wall that actually had been built. Yeah, there's that, and makes as good a point as always. By the way, in case you're wondering, the administration is trying to do something. Department of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas visited the U.S. Customs and Border Patrol agents at the U.S.-Mexican border in El Paso. That's where 1,000 people showed up the other day and just walked right into the country. 20 House Republicans are pushing to have him impeached. GOP lawmakers have accused Mayorkas of not taking the crisis at the border seriously, with one lawmaker, Representative Andy Biggs, accusing him of releasing more than 1 million illegal migrants into the country, never to be heard from again. That is absolutely true. That's not an accusation. That is a reportage of news. Despite opposition, Mayorkas' visits put him ahead of President Biden, who is yet to visit the southern border. Yeah, so there you go. Earlier this month, President Biden was in Arizona, opening up a new chip factory, but didn't bother going to the border. Was that a let him eat cake moment? Yeah, I believe it was. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Thanks very much for being a part of our broadcast today. You can call us at 817-379-2172. 817-379-2172. Back with more in just a moment. The news, analysis, commentary, debate. This is the Wells Report. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. If you find value in this broadcast, please share it with your friends. Please invite them to subscribe to it. And if they like the show, give us a thumbs up. That would be very, very good. If you'd like to support the show financially, please do. Go to patreon.com/The Wells Report. patreon.com/The Wells Report. You can throw a buck or two at us every month, and it adds up, and it's really, really nice. So if you could help us out, that would be great. By the way, I'm not a big believer, and it drives me crazy to use the time-honored public television plea for cash. It does. But at this particular moment, our little bitty campfire of the Wells Report, which is essentially starting over after my duty on the border, that unfortunately is what we're left with at this particular moment. But as we are able to build the membership of people watching this, sooner or later we will be getting other streams of revenue coming to the broadcast. And I'll be able to stop saying things like this and so on. But I could use your help if you believe that there is something of value in this show. And I certainly hope you do. Then by all means, share it with your friends and encourage them to do the same thing. We're going to have to build this as a grassroots thing if it's going to make it. And I certainly hope it does. So there was something very interesting that happened the other day. And I thought what I would do is share it with you. Faced with catastrophic losses in the 2010 midterm elections, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi told then President Barack Obama that Democrats were pulverized at the ballot box because of what she determined to be a, quote, white male thing, unquote. This is in a new documentary. Hey, Mr. President, not a good night, Pelosi told President Obama on a phone call November 2nd, 2010. This is footage from the new HBO Max documentary, Pelosi in the House. The documentary, filmed by acclaimed documentarian Alexandra Pelosi, the House Speaker's daughter. That's funny. I never heard that she was acclaimed by anyone before this particular work, but okay. Anyway, nothing like good old-fashioned nepotism. But that moving on, it chronicles Nancy Pelosi's rise through Congress and her signature achievements, including the Affordable Care Act. On the phone with President Obama, Pelosi said the Democrats should not consider their wipeout as a referendum on the health care reform bill. Instead, she blamed white males upset with high unemployment rates for Democrat losses. Yeah. Our members have said they don't regret their health care bill right across the board. Even if we never passed health care reform, we're still going to lose this election because of 9.5% unemployment. Because it wasn't about that. It was about jobs, Ms. Pelosi assured the president. The white male, then she said this, the white male thing is just, well, that's a dominant thing. When they don't have jobs, they get in a mood. And we'll have to make some decisions in our caucus about how to go forward. Well, how very racist of you, Madam Speaker. Yeah. The phone call came as Democrats wrestled with the worst midterm election performance in more than half a century. Yeah, so it wasn't bad decision-making on the part of Democrats in 2010. No, it was because of white males without jobs in a mood. Okay. If you say so. All right. While we're talking about the stylings of Democrats led by Nancy Pelosi and the strange things they say, let's move on to the January 6th committee. Okay. This is the very latest. The House committee investigating the Capitol attack on January 6th will meet this upcoming Monday at 1 p.m. to vote on potential recommendations to the Justice Department to prosecute suspects for their roles in the January 6th riots. The chairman, Representative Benny Thompson of Mississippi, told reporters the meeting would include votes on recommendations in the final report, which would be released December 21st, according to reports on CNN and ABC News. Besides criminal referrals, the panel could also make recommendations to state bar associations about lawyers, to the Federal Election Commission about campaign violations, and to the House Ethics Committee about lawmakers, said Thompson. What he said was, we'll do all the business of the committee on the 19th. He said that yesterday, according to CNN and ABC. The House has already impeached former President Donald Trump on charges he incited the insurrection, but he was acquitted in a Senate trial. Several members of the committee have suggested he could face criminal charges for inciting violence. Okay. By the way, in case you're wondering, the committee also focused its investigation on a handful of White House and personal aides to President Donald Trump. According to the committee hearings, the targeted aides include Mark Meadows, the former White House chief of staff, John Eastman, a private lawyer for Trump who talked about alternate slates of electors, Jeffrey Clark, a former assistant attorney general for the environment at the Justice Department, drafted an unsent letter to legislative leaders in 6 states to alter their election results in favor of Trump. So it was an unsent letter that was a draft. And so that's going to create a criminal referral to the DOJ. I can predict that that one's not going anywhere. And Rudy Giuliani, one of Trump's personal lawyers who worked on the elector scheme and testified at a Georgia state hearing about baseless claims of election fraud. Okay. By the way, the committee recommendations are non-binding. It is essentially more of this political hit job that they've been working on for months. The Justice Department is already investigating the January 6th attack with a special counsel, Jack Smith. Legal experts said formal recommendations from the panel could spur the investigations. No, they've already been spurred because that's how they're going on now. Right. So in other words, this is, for all intents and purposes, completely and totally irrelevant. But USA Today believes that it should be something that we should talk about. And it should be something that they should report. And once again, we are badly damaging our nation in this political lynch mob. And it's awful. It's truly terrible, and it's bad for everyone. No one's going to win in this. The Democrats are not going to win in this. All it's going to do is sully the United States. And how many political prisoners do you want in the United States? How many do you want? And look at what they're doing here. Is it really their intention to believe that they're going to be able to create so much upset in the country against Donald Trump and his advisors and so on, that the Republican Party is not going to come back after Joe Biden? They're already saying they're going to do that. That may be why politically the January 6th committee is going to come up with these criminal referrals. That may be what they're after. They may be trying to create a big mess ahead of the Republican Party chasing down their president for a change. And once again, I'm not exactly sold the Republican Party is going to do that either. There are already Republicans saying, we shouldn't go after President Obama. Drives me crazy. The simple case of the matter is that there was scant information worthy of a special counsel investigation on President Trump. And oh, by the way, now there's another special counsel investigation into President Trump. It will probably end up with the very same results as the first one. But that laptop from Hunter Biden, that has real evidence in it. You back that up with the testimony of a guy who was actually the business manager of the Biden family and several other people, and there is at least enough to proceed to a grand jury. There's at least enough. And it's solid. This is solid information. This is the stuff we've seen. There's plenty more where that came from, and we haven't seen any of it yet. And these people, this January 6th committee, what are they going to try to inoculate themselves from what the Republicans are going to do, or what they're going to do is try to tire out the American people? Oh, here we go again, another investigation into another president. This tit for tat. Is that what they're hoping to do? If so, I think they're dangerously mistaken. But then again, when they went down this road to begin with, I said what they were trying to do was they were trying to practice scorched earth. And I was criticized by people. What do you mean, scorched earth? There's no scorched earth. President Trump is a criminal. Okay, then how come he hasn't been charged long before this? You got to remember, when they investigated President Clinton, it was about Whitewater. What it ended up about was him lying in federal court regarding his relationship with Monica Lewinsky. I am very sure that the Mueller investigation, had they been able to find anything on President Trump, regardless of whether it had to do with Russian collusion or not, I guarantee you that they would have come to the public with it. Just like what happened with President Clinton regarding the Whitewater incident that turned into the Lewinsky incident. That's what the Democrats were trying to do anyway. They were just trying to get some kind of an investigation in place. They had access to everything. They had access to both impeachments. They had access to, well, not both impeachments, but they had access to all the information that the January 6th committee has belabored over and over and over again, along with other people in the Democrat caucus of the House of Representatives, only to be turned away by the Senate twice. And so once again, we've got this lynch mob wandering around trying to get President Trump. Well, they're not expecting that to immediately turn on President Biden? What are they looking for here? What do they think the inoculation is going to be? I'm genuinely perplexed. I'm genuinely perplexed. There are times when I wish I was a part of the House of Representatives. There are times when I think about whether or not I should try it. But, look at what happens to people that are outside the public, the body politic. Look at what happens to those people. They get destroyed. I'm not exactly sure I want to put my family through this. And of course, then that works to the advantage of the body politic, doesn't it? Yeah. Anyway, but one of the things that I really wish I could affect when it comes to the House of Representatives is a genuine, serious, truth-based investigation into January 6th. I want a truth-based investigation into the Mueller investigation and where that all came from. I want there to be due process for everybody. I want John Brennan to come right back into Congress and try to explain why he lied the first time. I would try to get that done, but I'd give him a chance to do it. Because we've had enough politics. What the American people need now is truth. And when you see people that are flinching away from giving us truth, what you're seeing is them protecting the corruption of the government in the first place. And it doesn't make any difference which party it is. As we have been going through all of this, I'm seeing more and more people trying to convince themselves that the MAGA movement is dead. There's another column by Rex Hupke. I was going to report it to you, but it's Rex Hupke. He's just a bomb thrower. But the thing about it is that they're trying to say that the Make America Great Again movement is dead. They are sorely mistaken. They are sorely mistaken. And they are using a broken polling system to try to bolster their claims that all the people that voted for President Trump no longer care about him. They're trying to convince themselves of an alternate reality and hoping that the echo chamber actually changes people's minds. I guarantee you what's happening with all those people is they're waiting for the next chapter in the Trump story. President Trump says he's going to run in 2024. The Republican Party, typical of them, are looking at their last Republican president and saying that he was the problem, when they were the problem that got him elected in the first place. And once again, this absurdity that's being practiced on the American people by both sides of the aisle, they are gaslighting us at a level that is unseen in American history. It's just plain pure D gaslighting. What are they trying to accomplish? Because nobody's buying it. Nobody is saying, these politicians are right. Everybody's looking at their politicians and they're rolling their eyes regardless of the party. The only good thing about it is maybe it'll actually affect the body politic. I can dream, can't I? Back with more in a moment. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Our telephone number is 817-379-2172, 817-379-2172. Thanks very much for having us on today. We appreciate it greatly. So we've been talking a little bit about the IRS and famous people and IRS returns and so on and so on. We've also been talking about how people believe that just because you happen to be in the public eye, that your private information is somehow up for grabs. I have run across that myself a couple of times. I've had to point out, with the help of very expensive lawyers, that they were about to walk into a wood chipper if they kept saying nasty things about me, insofar as they don't have access to that because, believe it or not, I'm still a private citizen. Well, the same thing happened to Ken Griffin. In case you don't know who Ken Griffin is, he's a billionaire hedge fund manager. He has filed a lawsuit against the Internal Revenue Service and the U.S. Treasury, citing, quote, unlawful disclosure of his tax information. Yeah. This is what happens when the IRS becomes a political organization. You know, somebody says, "Oh, these evil people that don't pay all their fair share of taxes." Yeah. 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 In a complaint filed in federal court in the Southern District of Florida, the 54-year-old founder and CEO of the investing firm Citadel accused the IRS of violating, quote, legal obligations to safeguard and protect his information from unauthorized disclosure and willfully and intentionally failing to establish appropriate administrative, technical, or physical safeguards over its record-keeping system, unquote. This is going to be expensive. Starting in June of 2021, rather, in an unusual breach of tax return confidentiality, tax data about some of the richest Americans, including Jeff Bezos, Warren Buffett, Elon Musk, were released by ProPublica. The news organization publishes articles mentioning Griffin and using information from his tax records in April of 2022 and July of 2022. In one April story, ProPublica reported that Griffin had the fourth highest income in the country between 2013 and 2018. According to the data, he reported an average annual income of nearly $1.7 billion and paid a tax rate of 29.2% during those years. Okay, just in case you're wondering, you know, when somebody says something stupid about, these billionaires, they pay a lower tax rate than you do. First of all, it's not true because the tax rate that most people pay is somewhere around 27%. That's thing number one. He paid 29.2%. So let's just take a look at just how much money he actually paid in. Nope, that's not what I want to do. No. Okay. Let's see. 1,7,000. That's $17,000. 000. That's $1.7 million. 000. That's $1.7 billion times 0.29.2. 0.292 equals, he paid, let's see, he paid, let's see, what have I got here? I think I may have added, he paid, let's see, almost $5 million in taxes. $4.964 million in taxes. That's one guy. That's not true. That's not right. That number's wrong. Let me try this one more time. People make fun of me for trying to do math on the air. They make fun of me. Let's see. Okay, that's $170. That's $1,700. That's $170,000. That's $170,000 right there. That is 1.7. That's $1.7 million. That would be $170 million, and that would be That's three. That's $170 million, and then there we go. 1, 2. That's $1.7 billion times point. I'm just going to round it to 0.29 equals, and that is okay. So that's there we go. That's better. Okay, it's 493. That's $493 million. Okay. See, I'm always going to get the right answer after I get several wrong answers. That's kind of the sort of my story. So anyway, he paid almost $500 million in taxes on $1.7 billion annual income. So he paid almost $500 million. $500 million for every year between 2013 and 2018. Seriously? Okay, and by the way, ProPublica made it public. Why? Because these guys aren't paying their fair share. They're not paying their fair share of taxes. Really? The guy's paying almost $500 million every year. How much money does a single individual have to pay the U.S. government? Should there be a limit? I sure as hell think so. But of course, the real problem is that this poor guy actually had all that information made public. It's nobody's business. Absolutely nobody's business. But this is what happens when you have a political action committee disguised as the IRS. And you have a whole bunch of people in the mainstream media trying to make billionaires look bad. This is the Wells Report. We'll be back with more in just a moment. By the way, you guys, thanks very much for being with us, okay? And we'll be back for hour number 2. North to south, coast to coast, around the world. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. What do we do here? We report the news. We report the news honestly and fairly. We analyze the news for fact and bias. We point out both. We then make commentary. That's not news. That's just my opinion. Just as valuable as yours, and therefore open to debate. News, analysis, commentary, and debate. It's what we do here on the Wells Report, and thanks very much for joining us today. So I have spent an awful lot of time. I've spent an awful lot of time talking about politicians in general. And the reason I'm talking about politicians in general is because they can be a destructive force in our nation. And I've said that when it comes to Washington, D.C., the only thing more dangerous in Washington, D.C. than a politician is a lame duck politician. And there is a lame duck in Salem, Oregon, named Governor Kate Brown. All right, she's leaving the governorship. And on her way out the door, she is going to commute the death sentences of 17 people on the state's death row. Those sentences will become life without parole. Yeah. So this is something that I'm curious about. I'm interested in your points of view on this. Now, you got to keep something in mind when it comes to the death penalty in Oregon. It has a checkered past. I mean, people vote the death penalty away in Oregon, and then they vote it back, and they keep playing back and forth with this because every time they roll back the death penalty, murder rates go crazy, and so they roll it back in, and then they put a bunch of people on death row, and then they commute their sentences, and so on and so on. But there's a point to this that I want to make, a couple actually. No one has been executed in the state since 1997. The governor's order goes into effect today. After taking office in 2015, Kate Brown continued then Governor John Kitzhaber's 2011 moratorium on executions. In 2019, Brown signed a law that restricts the use of their death penalty. The state has had the death penalty in place since 1984. Capital punishment was banned in 1962, but it didn't use it until Douglas Wright was executed by lethal injection in 1996. Harry Moore died that same way in May of 1997. Both of those men waived their appeals. The order that came out yesterday comes as Brown was set to end her term as governor in January. Unlike previous commutations I've granted to individuals who have demonstrated extraordinary growth and rehabilitation, this commutation is not based on any rehabilitative efforts by the individuals on death row, she said in a statement. In other words, it reflects the recognition the death penalty is immoral. It is an irreversible punishment that does not allow for correction. It is wasteful of taxpayer dollars. It does not make communities safer. It cannot be and never has been administered fairly and equitably. As governor, Brown had commuted the sentences or pardoned 1,147 people as of September. That's more than all of Oregon's governors over the prior 50 years combined. In November, she pardoned 47,144 convictions for possession of 1 ounce or less of marijuana. Oregon's death row at the state prison in Salem was discontinued in 2020. The prisoners on it were moved to other areas of the prisons. According to the governor's office, Brown is believed to have been the 7th governor in 50 years who commuted the sentences of everyone in their state who had a death sentence. Here are the people whose sentences are being commuted. Jesse Caleb Compton, convicted in 1997 of the beating death of a 3-year-old in Springfield. Clinton Wennes Cunningham, convicted in the 1991 rape and murder of 19-year-old Shannon Faith by stabbing her 37 times. Ms. Faith was hitchhiking near Coos Bay. Randy Lee Guzek, convicted in the 1987 shooting murders of Rod and Lois Hauser in Terrebonne during a burglary. Gary Dwayne Haugen, convicted in the 2007 stabbing death of fellow inmate David Polin. He was originally sent to prison for killing his girlfriend's mother. He was sentenced to death in 2007. Michael James Hayward, convicted in 1994 of killing a clerk and the beating of another. He was sentenced to death in 1996. Robert Paul Langley Jr., convicted of murdering Anne Gray and Larry Rockenbrand in 1988 and burying them under a cactus garden at the Oregon State Hospital. Christian Michael Longo, convicted in the 2001 murder of his wife and 3 children, fled to Mexico before being extradited to the U.S. in 2002. Ernest Noland Lotches, convicted in the 1992 killing of a security guard in downtown Portland after being involved in a shootout. Michael Martin McDowell, convicted in the 1984 stabbing death of Joey Keever after escaping the Oregon State Penitentiary farm in Salem. Marco Antonio Montez, convicted of raping and murdering Candace Straub in a Portland motel room in 1987, sentenced to death in 1988, and again in 1992. Horatio Alberto Reyes Camarena, convicted in the 1995 stabbing death of Maria Zatina and the stabbing of her sister, Angelica Zatina, in Douglas County. Ricardo Pineda Serrano, convicted in the 2006 murder of Melanie Dang and her son, Stephen and Jimmy. Matthew Dwight Thompson, convicted in the 1992 stabbing deaths of Aaron McDonald and Bill Jones outside a bar in Portland. Bruce Alden Turnage and Joshua Abraham Turnage, the father and son from Jefferson, were convicted in the 2008 Woodburn Bank bombing, which killed State Trooper Bill Hakeem and Woodburn officer Tom Tennant. They'd been on death row for nearly 12 years. Michael Spencer Washington Jr., convicted in the shooting death of Mohammed Jabi in Gresham in 2004, and Tara Alyssa Zist, a.k.a. Carl Tenney, convicted in the 1994 death of Jeffrey and Dale Brown with a sword as they slept. He was sentenced to death in 1995. Okay, so the death penalty has always been a very serious source of consternation and concern for an awful lot of people, including John Adams, who was the second president of the United States. John Adams was very concerned about the state having the capability of doing something irreversible when it came to one of the citizens. And while that is notable and indeed considerable, it is based on what is not valid, in my view, which is the fact that there is reality that trumps philosophy. There is reality that trumps philosophy. And the reality is that these are bad people. There's also another thing to consider. I don't know what that was, but so far I seem to be on the air. I don't know what just fell down, but hopefully it wasn't important. Did you hear that? Anyway, let's move on. I've got 4 minutes to discuss with this, and then I'll go look to see what happened. Anyway, the simple case of the matter is, in all of this, is that there were juries of their peers who heard all of these cases against all of these people. And they came to the conclusion that the death penalty was appropriate. That is a jury of their peers, 12 people that have to agree unanimously, and they did. The judges in all those cases agreed with their assessments and sentenced these people to death. This lame duck governor has set aside all of that for the sake of her political belief that the death penalty is immoral. I'm not exactly sure that that is the right thing when it comes to our particular form of governance. Now, please understand something. Oregon is Oregon's so far gone, I don't know that they'll ever come back. They killed themselves economically by deciding that spotted owls were more important than the timber and paper industry. And everybody said, well, the northern spotted owl is an endangered species. It's the exact same bird as the southern spotted owl that lives in Mexico, and they use those for bait down there. There's so many of them. I don't have any idea what the problem was, except, of course, that it was environmentalism run amok. And so anyway, Oregon is a mess. It's been a mess now for about 20, 30 years. It's a mess. And you saw it during the BLM riots. Anyway, the problem with all that is that it being a mess is notwithstanding the fact that there is all kinds of very serious, very just, very understandable, and voted on procedures for judicial punishment in Oregon that were all set aside by a politician who could care less about the victims' families or anything else regarding the death penalty except for her politics and her belief that the death penalty is immoral. And once again, I think this points out a flaw when it comes to leftist, progressive politicians in the first place. And that flaw is as follows. I understand that someone murdering a fellow citizen is different than the state putting someone to death for that murder. Everyone in the United States believes that murder that's premeditated is as serious an offense as can be from a criminal standpoint. There is nothing more premeditated than the death of someone because of the death penalty handed out by the state. There is nothing more premeditated. I mean, it is an obscene ritual that once again clashes with the better ideas from a philosophical standpoint of most people. On the other hand, we have a politician that cares more about that particular death than the deaths of the people that earned these death row inmates their death sentences in the first place. You understand what I'm saying? I get it. I get it. The state putting somebody to death is not something that should be taken lightly. But on the other hand, what happens when there's no death penalty? There are more people put to death under heinous circumstances. Really? He stabbed her 37 times and the governor just commuted his sentence? Really? Seriously? I mean, there comes a time when your politics are just not real. And reality is where we live. God forbid we live in a more political world than we live in right now. Once again, please do give me a nation of laws, not a nation of politics. And we're going to have to do something about lame duck politicians going against the demonstrated will of juries and families. Don't you think? This is the Wells Report, back with more in just a moment. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Our telephone number is 817-379-2172. When it comes to the strangenesses of progressive thought, I feel the need to provide you with one more example today of just exactly what we're talking about. A woman in Norway is facing up to 3 years in prison on criminal hate speech charges. Criminal hate speech. Yeah. What did she say that was hate speech? Well, what she said is that a man cannot be a lesbian. She's facing 3 years in jail for making that statement. Tanya Gebyan is a lesbian filmmaker and actress. She was informed November 17th she was under investigation for speaking out against prominent Norwegian activist Christine Jentoft on Facebook. This is a Facebook spat that is possibly leading a woman in Norway to face 3 years in prison for saying that a man cannot become a lesbian. Are you good and confused so far? All right. Yeah. As it turns out, Jentoft is a transgender female that often refers to herself as a lesbian mother. Jentoft previously accused another woman, Christina Ellingsen, of transphobia for a similar claim. Ellingsen is also under investigation and faces 3 years in jail if she's found guilty of saying that Christine Jentoft, a transgender woman in Norway, is not a lesbian. The post... I'm sorry. The post on Gebyan's Facebook page under the investigation read, "It's just as impossible for men to become a lesbian as it is for men to become pregnant. Men are men regardless of their sexual fetishes." Gebyan said that she intentionally posted her Facebook message to draw attention to Norway's hate speech laws. Gebyan's comments appear to be under investigation for falling under a 2020 amendment to the country's penal code that added gender identity and gender expression under protected categories from hate speech. People found guilty of hate speech face a fine or up to 1 year in prison for private remarks and a maximum of 3 years for public comments. Women's rights activists, including the Women's Declaration International Norway, of which Ellingsen is a representative, have claimed the amendment undermined free speech and expression in the country. It's not the first time that Gebyan has spoken out on controversial topics surrounding gender and women's rights. Last year, she confronted Annette Tretta Bergensten. There we go. Norway's Minister of Culture and Reality, claiming Norway's Minister of Culture and Reality? Anyway, Gebyan claimed that misconstruing gender identity and biological sex was harmful and has discriminatory implications for women, especially lesbians. Will the Equality Minister take action to ensure that lesbian women's rights are safeguarded, making it clear there are no lesbians with male accoutrements and that males cannot be lesbians regardless of their gender identity, and by tidying up the mess of the harmful gender policies left behind by the previous government? I do not share an understanding of reality where there are only two biological sexes that are to be understood as sex. Gender identity is also important, says Tretta Bergstein. Well, the good news is that's happening in Norway so far. I've always thought of myself as a lesbian. Am I upsetting lesbians when I say that? I wonder. You're listening to The Wells Report. We'll be back with more coming up in just a moment. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Telephone number is 817-379-2172. 817-379-2172. You can call us, or you can take part in the chat room. The chat room is available on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Twitch. If you happen to be watching on Patreon or on Rumble, first of all, thanks. Share it with your friends, would you? I really would appreciate that. But this broadcast was recorded earlier today. We're live between 2 and 5 in the Central Daylight Time Zone. Okay. So I want to talk to you a little bit about something that is it's a mess. Everybody deals with their credit rating, right? Everybody deals with your credit rating. Pay your bills on time and you get a better credit rating, or so the theory goes. I mean, most of the time I really have to admit that I've had good credit ratings, I've had not so good credit ratings, and when I've been trying to fix my credit rating, I've done all kinds of things to make my credit rating really, really, really good and have gotten absolutely nowhere. I mean, cleaned up everything. Nah. Actually played the game. Nah. I mean, literally have done everything I possibly could, trying to get my credit rating up to as high as you can get. What is it? 800 something? I have 700 and whatever. Anyway, it is a frustrating mess that I pretty much ignore now at my own peril. And it's kind of a mess. Anyway, that being said, the Communist Party of China decided to take their credit rating system a step further. This happened in the 80s. Okay? It was an extension. The existing financial credit rating system was traced back to the 80s when the Chinese government attempted to develop a personal banking and financial credit rating system, especially for rural individuals and small businesses that lacked documented records. The Chinese government was trying to enhance trust in society with the system and regulate business issues such as food safety, intellectual property theft, financial fraud, stuff like that. Okay? What this morphed into was a system that helped regulate social behavior, not just business behavior, and improve the perceived trustworthiness of citizens. It morphed from, do you pay your bills, to whether or not you're trustworthy, and has come full circle to something they call the social credit system. It's the establishment of a record system so that businesses, individuals, and government institutions can be tracked and evaluated for their trustworthiness. There are multiple different forms of the social credit system being experimented with. The national regulatory method is now based on what is known as blacklisting and whitelisting. The program is mainly focused on businesses, very fragmented, contrary to the popular misconceptions. It's focused on individuals and is a centralized system. Give them time. Supporters claim that the system helps regulate social behavior, improve the perceived trustworthiness of citizens. Critics of the system, some stemming from misconceptions according to the Mercator Institute for China Studies, claim that it oversteps a rule of law and infringes on legal rights in residents and organizations, especially the right to reputation, the right to privacy, as well as personal dignity, and that the system may be a tool for comprehensive government surveillance and or suppression of dissent from the Chinese Communist Party. By the way, in case you're wondering, if you go to mylife.com, you can see the American version of the social credit system, and they've got your name in it. Why am I bringing this up? You may be asking this question. Why are you bringing this up? Well, USA Today came up with something that's very much like this. The headline reads, USA Today seeking submission for upcoming ranking of America's climate leaders. Excuse me? Interest among, this is from, by the way, Elizabeth Weiss, okay, in USA Today. Interest among consumers and investors about climate change is at record levels. USA Today is partnering with market data company Statista to put together a ranking of United States-based companies based on how much progress they've made in reducing their greenhouse gas emissions and the greenhouse gas emission intensity between 2019 and 2021. Emission intensity is a measure of the amount of greenhouse gases a company produces relative to its revenue. Making comparisons between different sized enterprises possible. Companies have the option of including Scope 3 emissions, but only Scope 1 and 2 are required. In other words, we're creating a system to rate your social trustworthiness when it comes to greenhouse gas emission intensity. Once gathered, the data will be used to rank companies within specific lines of business, such as automotive, consumer goods, energy, finance, retail, software, and transportation. To take part, companies must be headquartered in the United States with a minimum revenue of $50 million. They'll be required to fill out a short survey and verify the data provided. The survey can be found here. The deadline to complete the survey is December 22nd, 2022. Statista is a German-based market and consumer data company. Please email any further questions you have to climate-us@statista.com. What they're going to do is they're going to create a ranking system of trustworthy companies that are reducing their greenhouse gas emission intensity. Now, once again, this is a way to virtue signal in the United States. And it's also a way for you to inform on companies that you believe are either doing well from a standpoint of reducing greenhouse gas emission intensity. I mean, if you're a small company and you put out, a pound of carbon emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, well, then you're just awful. But if you're a multi-billion-dollar corporation and you put out a pound of greenhouse gas emissions, then you're virtuous. Yeah, this is a mess. This is an absolute flaming mess. And it's all built around a flawed concept. Flawed from a standpoint of reality, but not flawed from a standpoint of political swindle. You know, these G30 meetings, these meetings where all the world of the world's most advanced economies get together and try to come up with ways to consolidate their power. Everybody was worried about the Trilateral Commission, and they're worried about the Bilderbergs, and they're worried about all of these conspiracy theories and blah, 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 blah. The Illuminati. It's right out in front of you. It's all the politicians of all of these advanced societies around the country, around the world. They come together and say, okay, how can we create a one world government that everybody wants to be a part of, that we can fund with world taxes? I know, climate change. Yeah, what we'll do is we'll say that cloud over there is trying to kill you, and the only way you can save yourself is by paying a politician more money. That's where the green movement came from in Europe, that pretty much paralyzed just about every European country and threatened to do the same thing in the United States. But every time they try to do something in the United States regarding climate, God sends them a message that makes them look stupid. You know, they had to change it from global warming because every time Al Gore wanted to go make a speech about global warming, no matter what time of year it was snowing where he happened to be, tell me God doesn't have a sense of humor. Anyway, that being said, now what we're doing is we're having the mainstream media taking part in this political machine, trying to say, you know, we should support the idea that climate is so catastrophic on this planet that unless we pay politicians lots of money, we're all going to die. And that's why they're playing games with this. They're actually taking part in this global swindle. That's USA Today. And once again, they're doing it under the guise of news. They're trying to rank America's climate leaders. To what end? To what end? Gary, I'm not going to read that. If you want to know what Gary just put on the chat room, you're going to have to go to the chat room and find out for yourself. It's vulgar and completely inappropriate. Your social credit score has just taken a hit, mister. Anyway, what I'm trying to tell you is that climate change in general is nothing more than an international swindle perpetrated on the people of the world by their politicians. Politicians of countries that don't have a lot of money and aren't a part of the G7 or the G20 or the G30. Well, they get money from all of those rich corporations because, my God, did you remember just a few weeks ago they were talking about how, well, the damage done by the world's advanced societies when it comes to climate change means that you and I have to pay these emerging countries money for screwing up their climate. Excuse me? See how this works? This is all just a giant money game. This is the attempted establishment of a world government. Now, think about this for just a couple of seconds. There are no national governments that work properly anywhere in the world. We just heard about Norway getting ready to throw a lesbian in jail for 3 years because she said that a transgender male who referred to herself as a lesbian couldn't do so because she was actually a man, and men cannot be lesbians. Which is odd for me because I've always thought that I was a lesbian. Anyway, that being said, what we have here is we have this word game going around with regards to this international swindle. And we have to back away from it. And everybody's involved in it, including USA Today and the rest of the mainstream media. They talk about global climate change as if it's actually real. It's not actually real. Everything that happens in the world's climate can be explained simply by the way the world works. If you're confused about it, just ask me and I'll explain it to you. But it's a long, involved explanation that is kind of cool, actually. It has to do with the pronating of the Earth's rotational axis, which is really cool. And in some cases, warm. Anyway, that being said, what's happening is that all these people are saying, my God, we have to do something to be able to fix our climate, except you can't fix the weather. This is such an odd concept. There are even fairy tales about it. Remember Chicken Little? The sky is falling? It's actually Chicken Little politics. And it's been going on long enough so that there are people that might actually think there's some value to it in some way, shape, or form. There is value to it insofar as a politician, it's a political lever being perpetrated on people that don't know any better. Not only do we have to collect money from you, we have to send that money to developing countries because we've screwed up their climate because we're so profitable and we're so prosperous. Excuse me? How about this? How about those emerging countries get rid of their despot governments that steal from them every possible opportunity they possibly can and actually try to develop their own national resources instead of paying every dime they get to some ruling junta? How about that? Oh, no, we can't do that. Yeah. Gary Abshire points out that there is almost identical climate change happening on Mars. And the reason is because the sun goes through an 11-year cycle, and the 11-year cycles are also based on 11-year cycles. It's a fusion cycle. And some people are confused by it, so it actually would be a confusion cycle. And speaking of fusion, did you check out that American scientists actually they were able to create a fusion reaction that made more energy than it took to actually create it? Yeah, I'll report on that as soon as I get a chance. But what I really wanted to do more than anything is I wanted to bring up this climate thing. And that's not the only reason. That's not the only story. When it comes to climate, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez came up with a climate documentary. And she released it. And it hit the box office over the weekend. Her film has made $80 so far. Yeah. Yep. Ocasio-Cortez accomplished nothing in Congress, and Greg Gutfeld said her film flopped, generating $80. Who would go see a movie that's the opposite of entertaining? There's nothing entertaining about that. But but it does show how great it is to be a progressive in a liberal biased culture. But she doesn't do her job, right? She makes movies. She gets to go to galas. She sits for glossy butt-kissing interviews in GQ and other women's magazines. GQ is actually a man's magazine, but it's become your girlfriend's magazine. It's ridiculous. Yeah. So anyway, Ocasio-Cortez, her documentary about climate change, failing. This is the Wells Report. Back with more coming up in just a moment. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Telephone number is 817-379-2172. Remember the fusion thing I was talking about? I have to admit, I've been looking at this story for a couple of days, thinking about the implications. But let me give you the news just in case you haven't heard anything yet. Like I said, I've had this news for about 3 days. I was on it before anybody else was, but I didn't report it because I have consternation. California scientists have achieved a major advance in fusion energy, a technology that could potentially provide clean, carbon-free power in the years to come. This according to the Department of Energy. The breakthrough was made at 1:03 a.m. December 5th at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory at the National Ignition Facility. That's 50 miles east of San Francisco. The work uses giant lasers that create heat and pressure like those found inside a star. And what that heat and pressure does is drive atoms together, releasing tremendous energy. The advance described, this would have been yesterday, that researchers have been able to create more energy in the process than they put into it, is known as ignition. In a news conference, U.S. Secretary of Energy Jennifer Granholm described it as a fusion breakthrough that will go down in the history books. It's a scientific milestone, said Arati Parabhakar, the director of White House Office of Science and Technology. It's also an engineering marvel beyond belief. It is hoped that in time the process can be scaled up and done cheaply enough to create power that is carbon-free without the creation of radioactive waste, which is the challenge with fusion's more problematic sibling, nuclear fission. Reaching ignition is an achievement that has come after 60 years of global research, said Jill Hruby, the Undersecretary for Nuclear Security and Administrator for the National Nuclear Security Administration. Tammy Ma, a fusion energy scientist who worked on the experiment, said she was standing in an airport waiting room when her boss called to tell her that it had been a success. I burst into tears. I was jumping up and down in the waiting area. People said, "My gosh, woman, what's the matter? Is everything okay?" And she goes, Yes. We've just created fusion. And people go, "Well, what are you confused about?" No. Fusion. Fusion? You mean like Jeff Lorber? Okay, that's kind of that's a music joke. The musicians are going, Jeff Lorber. Anyway, the arrival of commercial fusion reactors that will power cities will take years and the work of public and private researchers, according to Kim Budil, the director of the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. I don't want to give you a sense that we're going to unplug the National Ignition Facility. We're going to plug it into the grid. But this is the fundamental building block of such work. Okay? Fusion consists of combining two atoms together, a process that releases tremendous amounts of energy. It's the opposite of nuclear fusion, which splits atoms apart. At Lawrence Livermore Lab, the researchers focused 192 enormous lasers on a tiny metal cylinder, no bigger than a pencil eraser. Inside sat a tiny peppercorn-sized pellet of fuel. The lasers smash the pellets in from all sides, which compresses it to the point you get the density and temperature to trigger fusion is similar to what you have in the sun, said Eric Gaiman. He is the particle physicist and senior fellow with the Energy Innovations, a nonpartisan energy and climate policy firm. For the first time, researchers were able to get more energy out of the process than they put in, a proof of concept that this can eventually be an energy source. 2 megajoules in about 2 megajoules in, that's how much energy they put into it. And they got 3 megajoules out. That's a 1.5 gain. This according to Marvin Adams, the Deputy Administrator for Defense Programs at the National Nuclear Security Administration. When pressure and heat were sufficient, the atoms combined released more energy than had been put into the process. That was the breakthrough. Previously, it always took more energy to make the process happen than came out. Now the calculus has changed. Here's calculus again. I can't do algebra, and they're already making me deal with calculus. Anyway, it makes energy production eventually possible. This is just the first step. If you're climbing the Eiffel Tower, this would be the first landing. After many scientific and engineering obstacles are overcome, the goal would be to create a power plant that used fusion to generate heat and electricity. The potential benefits are enormous: clean, carbon-free, abundant, reliable energy capable of meeting the world's energy demands, said a plasma physicist and lead for the Internal Fusion Energy Project. When atoms are smashed together and they combine, neutrons are released. These stream out of the reaction chamber, can be used to heat a liquid, presumably water, to create steam. The steam, in turn, can be used to power turbines that would produce electricity. Alan Brizard, a theoretical fusion expert at the St. Michael's College in Vermont, who was not a part of the project, but can explain it. Okay. So basically what we're talking about here is another way to heat up water. There is actually a fusion reaction that combines 3 elements that releases electrons. No radioactivity, just electrons at 60 cycles per second. That's electricity. It goes from a reaction to electricity directly. Using a fusion reaction to heat water is okay, it's a step forward, but it still is incredibly inefficient. By the way, in case you're wondering, I heard about this fusion reaction in 1978, and they still haven't brought it to us. But anyway, this is for real, and it is a good step forward, except for one small problem. What happens if we do enough fusion to actually create the sun on the Earth? Oops. Is that going to be the last thing from the human endeavor? The word oops? Back with hour 3 in a minute. North to south, coast to coast, around the world. This is the Wells Report. Greetings. My name is John David Wells. What do we do on this broadcast? Well, we report the news honestly and fairly. We point out facts and bias in the news. I make commentary, just my opinion, not the news. And we debate. We debate the news. We debate the analysis. We debate the commentary. In some cases, we debate the debate, which is sort of like beginning the begin, but let's move on. Yeah, the thing we were talking about right before we left was the idea that some scientists at Lawrence Livermore Laboratory, this was last hour, scientists at Lawrence Livermore Laboratory came up with nuclear fusion, where they took a bunch of lasers and they pointed it at, I think it was deuterium and one other fuel in a small pellet, and they put 2 megajoules of energy into this fuel pellet via laser and got 3 megajoules of energy out of it, which is a 1.5 to 1 ratio, which was impressive. Really, truly impressive. The problem with that, of course, is, well, what happens if you, say, for example, have a runaway reaction and suddenly you create a reaction that uses the entire Earth for fuel? Well, the answer to that question is simple. It would finally be your chance to finally, once and for all, get away from everything. But that doesn't necessarily take nuclear fusion. What we've been dealing with is nuclear fission. Nuclear fusion is putting atoms together and releasing energy. Nuclear fission is splitting atoms and creating energy. Well, you can do that in a lot of different ways. You can do it in a large reactor and make heat and then use the heat in the archaic process of using steam to run turbines to make electricity, which is a total waste. Or you can take some of that very same fuel, maybe a little less crude. In other words, you refine it a little bit more and you can create a bomb that will destroy a city. We call those nuclear weapons. Now, it's been a while since we had a good old-fashioned world war. Okay? And there seems to be an effort to try to get one going. I guess people are nostalgic for World War and the use of these nuclear weapons we've spent so much money on and so on and so forth over the years. And people say, gosh, it's time to get a return on our investment. And why not start World War III by destroying Ukraine? This, by the way, was from 16 hours and 58 minutes ago. A Russian commander said that Russia cannot defeat the NATO bloc in Ukraine without using nuclear weapons. Commander Alexander Khodakovsky, there we go, Khodakovsky, of the Russian militia in the Donetsk region, said on Russia One that Moscow's resources were limited. He claimed that Russia is now fighting the entire Western world, which is why the next escalation of the Ukraine war can only be one, and that is nuclear. Yeah, we'll do our absolute dead level best to get Ukraine to rejoin Mother Russia by blasting it into atoms. He also claimed that Russia is now fighting the Western world. He said that we don't have the resources to defeat the NATO bloc with conventional means, but we have nuclear weapons for that, said Khodakovsky. The Kremlin hasn't really responded, although Vladimir Putin did warn that the increasing threat of nuclear war could be viewed as the nuclear arsenal as a deterrent rather than a provocation. Well, when he said that, apparently he changed his mind just a little bit, because this was reported earlier today at 2:29 Eastern time, about a couple and a half hours ago, Vladimir Putin has renewed his nuclear threat against the West by appearing to ready a nuclear missile for launch. The footage shows a huge Russian Yars rocket able to hit the United Kingdom and the U.S., being loaded into a silo at a base near Moscow. Yeah. The intercontinental ballistic missile has a 7,500-mile range, and when nuclear armed, it's reportedly 12 times more destructive than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. That was a 15 kiloton. 15 times 12. I know. I shouldn't be doing this. Hang on a second here. Let's see. 15 times 12 equals 250? No, 180 kilotons. It's a 200 kiloton nuclear warhead. It was seen in Russia propaganda being installed in a launch pad using a special transport and loading unit. No indication of any order for an imminent launch. Putin was seen in late October overseeing the launch of a similar Yars nuclear missile on a mock attack on the West amid high tensions in the war with Ukraine. In the drills, Russia reportedly practiced its response to a Western nuclear attack and were aimed at targeting the UK and the US. Fears have been raised that the 70-year-old tyrant could detonate a nuke as his forces face mounting losses in the disastrous Ukraine war. Russia is building up to a more nuclear showboating as it marks its annual Strategic Missile Forces Day on 17 December. That would be 3 days from now. Missile Forces Commander Colonel Alexei Sokolov made clear the latest exercise was aimed at sending a message to the West. Both the UK and the US are within range. The importance of this operation lies in the fact that the missile will be put on combat duty on schedule. The homeland will get another nuclear missile weapon, which will make it possible to solve any tasks at the strategic level. Yeah, there's nothing like a nuclear weapon to solve strategic tasks. Yeah. Combat engineer Vadim Vyazovsky told TV Zvezda, the Russian Defense Ministry's own channel, "I feel proud of Russia that my country is putting such products into service so that the motherland can sleep well." The Kozelets missile base is currently undergoing a modernization and revamp. The Yars modification is a modification, of the Topol M missile system, was first deployed in 2009. Good missile. Video released during October drills shows armed forces personnel in front of computers launching one of the missiles. Another bit of footage shows a Siniva intercontinental ballistic missile being fired from a submarine in the Barents Sea and a Tu-95 bomber that launched cruise missiles. The Kremlin said that all tasks set for the exercise were fulfilled and the missiles were test-fired and reached their designated targets. Yeah, and so Mother Russia can sleep well. Of course they can. Now, as we come to this, Russia is publicizing the installation of the intercontinental missile ahead of Strategic Forces Day. That is the latest that's coming out right now. This is a live update from CNN. In a further sign of importance that attaches to strategic nuclear deterrence, the Russian military has loaded a Yars ballistic missile into a silo launcher in the Kaluga region. The Ministry of Defense released video to mark the event just ahead of Day of Strategic Missile Forces, the Day of Strategic Missile Forces, or Strategic Missile Forces Day. It said the intercontinental ballistic missile of the Yars complex was loaded into a silo launcher at the Kozelsky Missile Formation in the Kaluga region. The importance of this operation lies in the fact the missile will be on combat duty as planned. The motherland will receive another sample of nuclear missile weapons, which will allow us to solve any tasks at the strategic level. By the way, in case you're wondering, the United States is sending a Patriot missile battery to Ukraine. This is new. The Biden administration is finalizing plans to send the Patriot missile defense system to Ukraine that could be announced as soon as this week, according to 2 U.S. officials and a senior administration official. The Pentagon plan still needs to be approved by Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin before it's sent to President Joe Biden for his signature. The 3 officials told CNN approval is expected. Ukraine has been calling for the U.S. to send the advanced long-range air defense system that is highly effective at intercepting ballistic and cruise missiles as it comes under a barrage of Russian missiles and drone attacks that have destroyed key infrastructure across the city and country. It would be the most effective long-range defensive weapon system sent to the country. Officials say it will help secure airspace for NATO nations in Eastern Europe. It's not clear how many missile launchers will be sent, but a typical Patriot battery includes a radar set that detects and tracks targets, computers, power generating equipment, an engagement control system of up to 8 launchers, each holding 4 missiles ready to fire. Once the plans are finalized, the Patriots are expected to ship quickly in the coming days. Ukrainians will be trained in the use of them at a U.S. Army base in Grafenwöhr, Germany. This, according to officials. Ukraine has been asking for the system for months. The logistic challenge of delivering it and operating it are immense. Despite those obstacles, the reality of what's going on the ground led the administration to make the decision. The senior administration official told CNN, noting that the continuing intense Russian missile barrages are something that they have noticed and are now about to do something about. Unlike smaller air defense systems, Patriot missile batteries need much larger crews, requiring dozens of personnel to properly operate them. The training for Patriot missile batteries normally takes multiple months, a process the U.S. will now carry out under the pressure of near daily aerial attacks from Russia. The system is widely considered to be one of the most capable long-range weapons to defend the airspace against incoming ballistic and cruise missiles, as well as some aircraft. Because of its long range and high altitude capacity, it can potentially shoot down Russian missiles and aircraft far from their intended targets inside Ukraine. Previously, U.S. has sent Patriot missile batteries to NATO allies like Poland as a way to bolster their defenses, and sent other weapon systems to Ukraine to assist against a Russian invasion. That would be the HIMARS system, which is a multiple rocket launch system that they have used successfully against Russia. In recent years, the U.S. sent Patriot missiles to Saudi Arabia and Iraq to counter threats posed by Iran and its proxies, and into the Pacific region to deter North Korea. In total, more than a dozen U.S. allies, including Germany, Japan, and Israel, have also purchased the system. The U.S. has sent Ukraine mid-range defensive national advanced surface-to-air missile systems in recent months. CNN has reached out to the National Security Council for comment. All right. So what is this turning into? Probably nothing. But that being said, stranger things have happened with less provocation. One of the problems with doing what we're doing is we're fighting a semi-war with Russia. And the reason that we're fighting a semi-war with Russia is because Russia is fighting a semi-war with Ukraine. Ukraine is doing their best to keep Russian forces from overrunning their country, and so far they've been very successful. But you've got to remember that Russia is not fighting this wholeheartedly. We haven't heard about their Air Force actually bombing any of the cities in Ukraine. And the reason is because they would be bombing their fellow countrymen. Not something that the military would want to do very much. Ukrainians believe that they have their own country. Russia believes that Ukraine is part of Russia. Ukrainians are stiff-necked thistleheads. They kind of like their freedom and they'd like to keep it. Russians are saying, you can't be serious. Is that how World War III starts? Unfortunately, we'll just have to see. Back with more in a moment. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. And yeah, the N-word keeps getting thrown around. Not that N-word, the nuclear war N-word. Yeah. Yeah. Jess says, does that smell like World War III to anybody but me? Well, actually, it smells like World War III in Kiev. Yeah, there's a guy there who is working on trying to survive what may be the beginning shots of World War III. Serhiy Dmytruk, D-M-Y-T-R-U-K, Dmytruk. His biggest fear is that he's going to survive the initial blast, but then die from hunger, thirst, or cold. So what he's done is he's assembled what he calls a nuclear backpack, crammed with enough provisions and survival paraphernalia to sustain him for a week. By the way, it takes about 2 weeks after the last blast for the radioactivity to decay enough so that you can go out there without being poisoned. Just saying. So you got to have at least 2 weeks in your backpack, not one. Pavlo Huk, who has compiled a similar backpack, is sitting out in the basement of his home and workplace, has rented a house in the countryside, planning to equip it with a generator, food, and fuel. His worry is that friends and relatives who have shrugged off the threat will die because they have not taken similar precautions. In other words, this is the Kiev version of preppers. Natalia Sulima fears that she will be separated from her 5-year-old son, Misha, and she's been drilling him on the importance of following adults to a shelter whenever the sirens sound. She won't let him out without his own version of a nuclear backpack, a school bag containing a Transformers toy, snacks, and his favorite book, The Boy Who Lives with Dragons. Wow. It's like a nuclear Happy Meal. I can't believe we have to do this in the 21st century. I can't believe you have to do it either. To varying degrees, residents of Kiev are contemplating the once unthinkable possibility their city could be targeted by a nuclear weapon. Ominous references by Russian President Vladimir Putin says that he's prepared to use all necessary means to win in Ukraine, and frequent chatter on Russian TV talk shows advocate the use of nuclear weapons, and that gives the people of Ukraine grounds for concern. Oh, you think? Yeah. Let's discuss the realities of this. All right. First of all, Vladimir Putin is not going to start a nuclear war. He cannot afford to fight a real war with Ukraine. He is not going to pick a fight with the rest of the world using nuclear weapons. It's just not going to happen. Not only that, but China is not economically capable of starting a nuclear war either. They don't have the weaponry and they don't have the economy, regardless of what the mainstream media has whipped a frothy frenzy about the fact the Chinese economy is the second largest in the world. Okay, it may be the second largest in the world, but it's so far behind the United States economy that it mainly doesn't exist. Russia's economy is about the size of France. You don't fight a world war if you're France. And so the idea of World War III at this particular time is relatively silly. The only group of people in the entire world right now that could actually contemplate fighting World War III with nuclear weapons would be the United States. And why would we want to do that? There's no real reason to destroy the rest of the earth, because sooner or later it's going to come around to you. So all of this is basically political posturing. But that being said, if you have a cocked pistol and you point it at somebody, you may know yourself that you're not intending to shoot them. But there are things that happen, a little nervous glitch, for example, on your trigger finger, that create real problems. I would suggest that everybody kind of stand down, but nobody listens to me from a standpoint of nuclear weapons theory in the first place. But I really wish they'd stop. Don't you? This is the Wells Report. Back with more in just a moment. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Our telephone number is 817-379-2172. 817-379-2172. Yeah, they keep throwing around the nuclear words of war. And I doubt that it's actually going to happen. As a matter of fact, it's not possible at this particular moment for the people that say they're going to. It would be the end of everything for Russia. And, you know, if they did that, the entire world would attack Russia, and that would be silly, and that would not work. So nuclear weapons basically cancel themselves out, but it's impossible to live a life without one. It's impossible to live in the world right now without them, because they are quite literally the nuclear trump card. And so that's why so many people are after them, and so many people lord over the secrets of having them. And why people like Iran would find themselves in a position where they would create their own demise should they continue pursuing one, because of what they've said before. Nuclear weapons are the ultimate in blunt instruments. There is no moderation when it comes to that, and therefore talking about it is essentially pointless. And that's basically the point of what I'm trying to make here. What I'm trying to make here is I'm trying to point out that all of this is essentially built around a concept called deterrence. And deterrence is that putting the thought of your enemy, putting something in the mind of your enemy that would cause them to not attack you based on the retribution that they would suffer if they did. It worked out beautifully for the Cold War. That's how we defeated the Soviet Union. That's why this country is still standing and the Soviet Union is not. Is because we practiced deterrence. And a lot of very strange things happened based on that concept. Now, when it comes to places like China and so on, well, we find ourselves in a position where, because of our system and because of the way we do business, we do open ourselves up to, say, for example, early exploitation. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about here. Lenin took over Mother Russia at some point in the early 20th century. And while he was still alive, he made statements like this. They, the capitalists, referring to non-communist economic systems, will furnish credits which will serve us for the support of the Communist Party in their countries. And by supplying us materials and technical equipment which we lack, will restore our military industry necessary for our future attacks against our suppliers. To put it in other words, they will work on the preparation of their own suicide. Now, that was transmuted, if you will, by somebody saying, what we're going to do is we're going to sell them the rope they end up hanging us with. And yeah, when you live in a capitalist society, and you work your way through to something resembling the obtaining of a profit, there can be mistakes made that do indeed further the demise of your own country. We're living with one of those right now. And this is being written about in Fox News. Okay, now this is an opinion piece by John Boozman. All right. I know what you're saying. Who is John Boozman? Well, he is a senator from Arkansas. He's a Republican. He's a member of the Senate Appropriations Committee and ranking member on the Appropriations Subcommittee on Military Construction and Veterans Affairs. Okay? And he has written this piece, which I think you ought to listen to, which is why we're talking about it. Protect U.S. military installations from prying eyes. Defense funding bill takes China threat seriously. The U.S. must safeguard secrets and assets from uninvited malicious actors, including China. Chinese President Xi Jinping has made it clear his intention to lead the People's Republic of China to new heights of global influence and dominance. There's actually nothing wrong with that, as long as they don't try to destroy you in order to defeat you in that race. When he addressed the 20th Party Congress a few months ago, President Xi outlined his commitment to countering any perceived threats from the U.S. or the West more broadly, to the Chinese Communist Party's authoritarian rule at home and its vision for an even greater international role. It's time to take the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, at its word and ensure that we are prepared for competition between our countries to further escalate. In other words, we are on the brink of a new Cold War, this time with China. The old Cold War with the Soviet Union was nerve-wracking enough. I'm not real happy about having to go through all that again. Anyway, the senator goes on to say, one obvious need is to safeguard our nation's most secure secrets and sensitive secrets and assets from uninvited malicious actors, including those with direct or indirect ties with the People's Republic of China. Okay? In the last several years, listen to this. In the last several years, the risk posed by Communist Chinese Party-aligned individuals and entities securing land in proximity to U.S. military bases and other government facilities has only increased. You've heard about this. In 2016, a Chinese businessman who formerly served in the People's Liberation Army and is connected to numerous CCP officials procured thousands of acres of land in the Texas Val Verde County, home to Laughlin Air Force Base. Earlier this year, public reports that a Chinese agriculture company is buying 300 acres of land about 15 miles from an air base in Grand Forks, North Dakota, has also drawn heightened scrutiny. Aside from concerns about taking farmland out of production completely or placing it under the financial direction of antagonistic nations, particularly at a time of rising costs and concerns about the stability of the global food supply, the U.S. must constantly be attentive to our adversaries' aims to exploit every vulnerability and gain economic and military advantages. That would include expanding its espionage and intelligence gathering activities on foreign soil. Once again, you have to remember that this is coming to us from Senator John Boozman of Arkansas. Okay? So aside from concerns about taking farmland out of production completely, Congress has begun to respond to the rising threats, and in fiscal year 2023, the National Defense Authorization Act, it contains a provision that would require the federal government to take the next step in securing confidential information about our military operations and preparedness. I authored language in the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, requiring the Department of Defense to examine this danger and advise Congress on efforts to counter it. The House of Representatives recently passed this critical legislation. I expect the Senate to follow suit in the coming days. By the way, this is not the first time this happened. Okay? You have to understand something, that nations like the United States, China, Russia, and so on, France, Germany, Great Britain, they do this kind of stuff all the time. It's not just a Chinese thing, okay? As a matter of fact, back in the 70s and 80s, Japan tried to spend an awful lot of money in the United States. They were buying up large swaths of LA. And what ended up happening, of course, is they ended up selling large swaths of land in LA, although Sony, I believe, still owns Columbia Pictures. But I don't think so. Anyway, that being said, these attempts to engage the United States economically on its own turf usually don't work very well. And you also have to understand that China can learn an awful lot more about any of America's U.S. Air Force bases. They can learn an awful lot more by virtue of their satellite constellations looking at us, as opposed to buying farmland near us. Yeah, it's not something that I think is anything more than basically a ruse to try to get a rise out of us in some way, shape, or form, although it is something that I think is worthy of investigation. You have to understand that this is probably not as big a deal as the senator is trying to make it think. or make you think. But what's interesting to me is that the United States at one time wanted to create a way to spy on the Soviet Union. And so what they ended up doing was they ended up coming up with this fabulous aircraft. It was called the A-11 and then followed on by the A-12. It was misrepresented as the SR-71. It is still the fastest air-breathing aircraft ever created by anyone. It has flown hundreds of missions. It has been shot at thousands of times. Nothing ever got close. And they retired it because it was too expensive. And because we had these satellites that did a better job anyway. What was interesting about that aircraft is it flew so fast that even steel would have trouble dealing with the temperature. So what they had to do is they had to find a source of titanium. At that particular time, the United States didn't make much titanium. They still don't. Timet, which is a factory that makes titanium, is very near Las Vegas. And Timet's a very cool place. And they make titanium, but we didn't make a lot of that in the late 50s and early 60s. Guess where the titanium for the SR-71s, and they built, I think, 24 of them or 22 of them. Guess where that titanium came from? That's right. The Soviet Union. What ended up happening is that the United States created a whole bunch of phantom companies looking for titanium production. And these phantom companies went to Russia, and Russia sold us the titanium. And we built the SR-71 with it. So when you start thinking about all this kind of stuff, it happens a lot. And it's not just China being evil and trying to look at one of our Air Force bases. This is probably just a ruse. But like I said, it's important enough to actually do something about. Because the idea that your enemies would provide you with the necessary means to fight a war against them is a viable tactical / strategic idea. One that many of us spend a lot of time thinking about. Yeah, you didn't know about the Russian and titanium. Yeah. The Russian titanium is how the SR-71 was built. It's a fascinating story, in fact. It truly is. Because Russia really likes titanium, they use it a lot. They built several submarine classes made out of titanium. And the United States never really did any of that, as far as we know. Okay? Just leave it at that. But all I can tell you is that this senator I'm glad he's pointing this out. I think it's something that's worthy of consideration, right? He goes on to say in this article, the House of Representatives recently passed critical legislation. I expect the Senate to follow suit in the coming days. Once passed and signed into law, the NDAA will direct Pentagon to present its findings to the Senate and House Armed Services Committees so legislators on both sides of the Capitol can take appropriate action to ensure the U.S. government is doing everything within its power to prevent our military installations from being susceptible to CCP spycraft. And keep something in mind, CCP, Communist Party of China, spycraft is pretty good. Although I wouldn't necessarily call Eric Swalwell a real rocket scientist in the first place. And his liaison with Fang Fang is really dumb. But that being said, you have to understand that these people make these moves. And they're really, really good at it. Now, remember something else. Dianne Feinstein had a driver who was also Chinese, who was a member of the Chinese Communist Party and their intelligence wing. And he drove her around for years. These people are very good at this. And whether they buy farmland in Montana near an Air Force base or not, they're going to get information about us. And we get information about them because we do the same thing. So I'm glad the senator is doing everything he can to try to keep us vigilant, because that's really the message here. We need to pay attention to what our enemies try to do and try to pull off. And we need to make sure that we do prudent things to keep them at arm's length. That's not something that we're historically great at. But then again, like I said, Russia sold us the titanium we used to spy on them for decades. So it happens. By the way, speaking of China and speaking of technology and speaking of all of this stuff, Apple iPhone has a new data security protection. How to update your device. This from Fox News. We'll go through this when we come back to the Wells Report. Stay right there. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Telephone number is 817-379-2172. By the way, Gary points out, what about TikTok? Everybody's all worried about TikTok, so on and so forth, and blah, 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 blah. Aside from essentially providing video that somebody in the Chinese Communist Party might blackmail you with, you know, it may look really, really cute when you're in high school doing all those weird dances and stuff like that. But when you're, you know, I don't know, when you're like, you know, some important high mucky muck in the U.S. government, maybe what they'll try to do is they'll try to bring those back out and say, see how you moved then? Huh? You really want us to bring that back out for you? You better vote for us. You better vote for our way of things. You know, I doubt very sincerely that that's going to be a problem, especially since, you know, everybody talks about how China is trying to get all this information on us. Yeah, okay. Well, they got all of the government personnel records. and I filled out forms that essentially gave them the keys to my personal kingdom. I was looking for a security clearance, and you know what? They got all that information on me, so I don't have to put TikTok on my phone. And I'm pretty sure that with this vaporous thing known as the cloud, that's available to anybody who has access to the cloud, or as you'd say, cloud clout. Anyway, I don't have that kind of clout with the cloud. Anyway, there is a brand new release of iOS 16.2. I have it brought up. I brought it up here on my phone. It says download and install. I just hit the button, and now it wants me to insert my passcode, which I've done. And so what I'm doing is I'm now updating my phone. Oh, wait, I have to. Let's see. I agree. Have you ever read one of those terms and conditions thing? Yeah. Does it say in there? It probably says right there. By the way, we're going to sell everything that's on your phone to the Chinese anyway. It could say that. I don't know. Anyway, so I think I've done that. Theoretically, it's downloading, but it's not telling me that it is. So I'm just assuming that's happening. What is it? Well, the latest update includes advanced data protection for the iCloud, as well as Apple Music Sing, whatever that is, Freeform, lock screen improvements, and other features and bug fixes. Advanced data protection, which is why I'm talking to you about this, expands the number of iCloud data categories protected using end-to-end encryption to 23, including iCloud backup, notes, and photos, and provides what Apple says is its highest level of cloud data security. The only major iCloud data securities not covered are iCloud Mail, Contacts, and Calendar because of the need to interoperate with the global email, contacts, and calendar systems. Okay. Apple says iCloud already protects 14 sensitive data categories using end-to-end encryption by default. Advanced data protection is Apple's highest level of cloud data security, giving users the choice to protect the vast majority of their most sensitive iCloud data with end-to-end encryption, so it can only be decrypted on their trusted devices. Okay. See, what is this thing doing? Is this thing doing anything? It doesn't look like it's doing anything. Anyway. Advanced data protection is Apple's highest degree of cloud data security, giving users the choice to protect the vast majority of their most sensitive iCloud data with end-to-end encryption. It can only be decrypted on their trusted devices. The feature will make it more difficult for hackers, spies, and law enforcement agencies to access sensitive user information. In a blog post, Apple said enhanced security for users' data in the cloud is more urgently needed than ever, citing research that says data breaches have more than tripled over the past 8 years. Okay. Yeah, software update. Let me see what I'm doing here. Let's see. Learn more. Download only. What are we doing? Is this thing doing anything? I don't know. Anyway, I guess it'll tell me one way or another. That's one of the annoying things about this. It says, okay, I've got this handled, and it ignores you. Whatever. So in a blog post, the Apple said the enhanced security for users' data in the cloud is more urgently needed than ever. It's available in the U.S. The feature will start rolling out to the rest of the world in early of 2023. The iPhone needs to be updated to iOS 16.2 before users can opt in. Go to Settings, General, and then US, and then Software Update. I did that. General, Software Update. Yeah, I did that. Okay, anyway. Let's see. Following the update, re-enter Settings, find iCloud and Advanced Data Protection. Set it up, tap either Account Recovery or Advanced Data Protection, then hit the Set Up Account Recovery. Add a recovery contact. Apple suggests choosing a trusted person to help you regain access to your account. You'll be asked to send a message to that contact. We'll have to approve the request. If you don't want to trust another person with the cloud data, set up a 28-character code and verify before it's enabled. Enter your iPhone password to enable advanced data protection. Enter for your iPhone password. Okay, so there you go. So if you have a new iPhone, and I do, go ahead and set this thing up if you want extra security. I guess. Now the question is, am I actually setting it up? I don't know. Checking for update. This update. Okay. Yeah. Preparing the update. Okay, it finally showed me something. It said preparing the update. So it's actually working. I'll let you know whether or not it invalidates my entire phone or bricks it. Turns it into a mess that I can't use. Of course, you'll probably know that because I won't be able to get in touch with you if that happens. I love living in the future. This is the Wells Report. We'll be back tomorrow. Thanks very much for joining us. Thanks for being a part of the Wells Report today. All righty then. Good night, everyone. Yeah, I want Apple protecting my data. Of course you do. By the way, don't forget, I'm playing again tomorrow night at the Dream Tacos in Bedford. Okay? We would really like you to show up. Because if you show up and buy a taco or something like that, then they'll continue having us there because people buy tacos when we show up. Wouldn't that be cool? Of course it would be. Anyway, we would like to keep the gig going. So if you can join us tomorrow at the Dream Tacos in Bedford, I sure would appreciate it. Thank you very much. In the meantime, that's all I have for today. I hope you enjoyed the show, although Nuclear Armageddon was not really exciting, was it? Or maybe it was. I don't know. Anyway, that being said, God bless all y'all. And I will see